We're live. Hey everyone, RT Bear here. You're probably sick of seeing me today. I've been on on YouTube almost all day. So one thing we did earlier is we did black and white. Black and white. The books are in. At least they sent me samples of them. So this is the actual book, you guys. So this is black and white Man vs. Machine, Volume 1 or Volume 2, I should say. Yeah. So. I did a morning show, and then I was on Graham Nolan's channel. Graham is trying to raise money for his daughter, Becky. They had a apartment fire and lost everything, burned to the ground. They lost everything. So I was over there trying to crowdfund. So they're doing an auction right now. So most eyes are probably over there, rightly so, trying to help Graham Nolan. But this is the Pontificators time. So same bat channel, all that good stuff. So we are going to still give you a killer show. So a lot of the guys are doing other things, and so we got a little low on manpower today. But you know what? All you need is myself and this guy right here. This guy right here. Yeah, it's always the opposite.
There you go. It's always reverse.
Yeah, it's the opposite. Yeah, Clint Helinski, man, how are you, brother?
I'm good, man. Good day of drawing. Got a page penciled and started inking today, which is always nice to keep those pages churning out. And close to wrapping up the last couple of pages of Maidens of Mayhem, so that'll be ending it. I'll probably wrap that book a new final closeout by the end of this month. And
wow.
On to the next one.
Yeah, you don't mess around. So if you guys don't know, Maidens of Mayhem description is in, the link is in the description, and that's Clint's new book, and it's fantastic, and it's sexier than all get out. And just to give you an update on black and white, like I said, the books are in-house. Like I got
Oh
the
yeah,
book.
I saw those. Look at that.
These are they just sent them. So there's one of each one of the books. Look at that spot UV. Look at that. So nice. I don't have the actual 200 or 2,500 books, but they sent me these. So I think it's just a courtesy, just sending me the book to see what it would actually look like.
Couple prototypes.
Yeah, they look fantastic. So this is the actual book. They're going to send them out in bulk tomorrow, and I don't know how many days it's going to take, but it shouldn't be too long. So early next week, we should have the books. Fingers crossed. They're already printed and everything. It's just all in the shipping. So I got storage space in the garage, all taken care of. So we should be able to accommodate, what is it, like 3,000? 4,000 books. 4,000 books
worth, I'd imagine.
Yeah, there's going to be 4,000 books, and we just got the boxes in those. What are they called? The Gemini mailers. Oh my gosh! I thought I had everything under control, Clint. I don't know where you store your stuff, but I thought I had everything under control. And so then my wife's going, "We need some more mailers." So she orders them. We got those earlier in the week, and then they went right where the books were going to go, right?
Yeah, so they take up space too.
Yeah, they took, and I'm like, this takes up the same amount of space as the damn books.
Yeah, like literally when I start my shipping part of the campaign, like I've got my chair here, and then like the 6 feet behind me is just stacked with boxes.
Yeah. I'm going to take this because it's very cool. SF Gaming art. The book looks unbelievable. Yes, thank you so much. And I don't know how it works, Clint. When you start closing out, or when you get your books,
sure.
you start getting more backers? Because man, black and white for the last couple of days has been on fire. We're at 135K now.
Wow, that is awesome.
Maybe, so is that how it works for you too?
Art, if you really wanted to help me out, maybe you and I would do a joint final closeout. Because you do, like, in your final closeout and you're ready to ship books, you'll get a big boost of backers. That's kind of what I'm anticipating with Maidens of Mayhem, is when I do, I'm hoping my final closeout will push me. I'm at 27,500 right now. It usually get a couple thousand right at closeout, and I'm hoping that'll push me over 30,000. But yeah, if you wanted to do a joint closeout, Maidens of Mayhem and the final closeout for Black and White, I
Yeah.
would probably, I would be happy to get some of those table scraps.
No, let's do something.
Yeah, we could do
Because
that towards the end of the month,
like,
maybe, and
yeah,
advertise
it's kind of a new thing, because all my other campaigns, like the first Black and White Volume 1, I just ended it.
it.
You know what I mean? Like, I didn't make a big deal.
That was a mistake.
Yeah, I didn't make a big deal of it. I was just like, well,
the way I look at it is there's certain backers have different mentalities. So you've got your excited day oneers. That's your opening weekend. You're going to get the majority of your backers that day. Your first 30-day closeout, you'll get a boost that day. And then your final closeout, you'll get a boost that day. And then you'll put it in demand. And everything will kind of slow down in the middle. But then when you're going to do your final closeout, your final numbers, I'm ending this, I'm getting ready to ship, you'll get a big boost on that final closeout too.
It makes a lot of sense, because there are people, because it takes a while to put these books together. So there are some people that wait towards the end so they can get their books back quicker. Or there are people, since sometimes these things take a year or so to put together, they didn't even know that the book was available, a year ago or whatever. They just came into CG, just recently. So yeah, there's all kinds of stuff like that, and that's the exciting part, right? That you can still find readers.
Oh yeah, still picking them up all the way through the campaign, and people will bookmark it. And like you said, there'll be new readers that just hadn't seen the campaign yet, and you'll get some of those. So
yeah,
yep, definitely.
Yeah, so we got Maids of Mayhem. It's going to be closing down soon, and Black and White as well. And we'll do something big. Hopefully, I mean, I kind of teased it with Ethan that we would do on the Kings, but we can do something like a pre closeout for Black and White.
Sure.
Maybe the day before or whatever, or the week before, because we don't necessarily have to do it on a Pontificators. You and I can just stream, and we can just do a big closeout, song and dance, do some tap dancing.
Yeah, if you wanted to, we could do it like a Sunday night pre-closeout, and then you could do your final closeout with Ethan. Obviously, that would
on
be
Monday. Yeah,
that sounds Kings. That would be a good closeout move for you. So
you're flexible. You can be flexible.
I'm always ready to work with you, Art. However you need me, baby.
I like the sounds of that. We got Joe Bernardo in the house. Aloha, guys. Black and White is amazing. Display of great art and story. Yes. And Joe has a trading card in as a stretch goal. So we did a fan art trading card contest, and Joe was picked out of the many. So Joe, look forward to your trading card. It came out fantastic. What I'm thinking of doing, I don't know. My wife and I are starting to brainstorm about like future campaigns and things that we would like to do. And we start going through all of the trading cards for all the various campaigns. And there's a lot. Like Chrono, I think Chrono had 9 cards just in the Chrono campaign. And I think this newest Black and White has 7 cards. You know what I mean? So we were thinking of doing like a Hack Shack Studios kind of binder. Not a huge thick binder for the trading cards, but like a smaller one, maybe, I don't know, maybe 10 pages, like those little plastic sleeved pages where they can put the trading cards so you can see the fronts and backs, and do something like that for one of the campaigns, just as a separate deal, or maybe you can get it full. So you'd get the binder. So it would be full of all the cards that have been done. So you get the full collection. It'd have to be limited because I don't have a lot of those cards. And then there'd still be room for new cards for the newer campaigns. Because I don't know if you're like me, like I have all these stray cards, but I don't have any place to put them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a lot of collectors out there, because a lot of campaigns have cards, and a lot of guys like collecting cards and getting their binders set up. And I wouldn't be surprised if there isn't a lot of CG backers out there that have like whole folders already full of multiple different campaigns, multiple mean, Cyber Frogs had a ton of cards. I know I put out cards for Pirate Queen and Blue Bombshell and all those books. So cards are always collectible and fun.
Well,
So,
usually the given is like with the pre-launch. There's usually a free trading
one
card
giveaway when you for your mail sign up for the mailing list.
Yeah,
for sure.
for the email and the pre-signups. Yeah. So there's a lot of cards floating around. Maybe I should think about like all the CG cards. So maybe make it bigger, even though it wouldn't just be Hack Shack trading cards. But yeah, we were thinking about doing that. And on the GoFundMe site, I've been thinking about doing bringing back or going back to print the black and white ash can. So it's 8 pages of new content. Well, it's not new content. It's from '94, but it's not in any of the other black and white. It's just in that
original ash can from the first launch or back
in
in
the '94. Yeah. It was the story was done as a promotion in the Extreme Studios issues. So I think there were 9 books, and each book had 2 pages or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then if you collected all 9 of the books or however many there were, you could get the complete story. So it's just a nice little addition, like little freebie if you buy all of them. Yeah. So those were the days. Anyways, you guys, it looks like Bob, Comic Book Bob, said he was going to be a little late. And I talked to Pedro earlier, and he said he'd be here. And Todd Melrooney just comes in whenever he wants to. So we might be getting some people later in the stream, but we did promise you, like, what was the best decade. So this might be even better because, Clint and I can go, toe to toe on this, and we can hash it out versus like, a bunch of opinions, maybe, just 2 opinions. And it might get heated because you never know.
It'll get heated. I mean, you and I butt heads off in our. We just don't see eye to eye. It's counterpoint. I said earlier.
It's like oil and water, man. We just don't mix, you and
exactly.
I. There's no commonality at all, which is completely untrue. But anyway, So I was just thinking, like, everybody has their favorite time when they bought comic books, right? So it's usually the time when they were kids, right? So that's usually the decade that's they're most fond of. But I was thinking, like, if you kind of remove yourself from that, even though we can get into that, but if you remove yourself from that, what really is the best decade for like what we do, like comic books, but mainly like action adventure comics? Oh, there's all right. So we're gonna get 3 opinions. Hey, Comic Book Bob, what's up?
Sorry about that, man. I had some family stuff I had to take care of.
No worries.
Well, I'm introducing the controversial. What is the best decade for comics? Yeah. So I don't. I mean, we can't get into because most people say the decade that they grew up. That's their favorite. But I kind of want to remove. I mean, we can get into that, but I kind of want to remove from that and just look at like each decade as like what was accomplished in that decade and then kind of evaluate it. So maybe we can go over each decade. We can each add a little bit to the flavor of that decade and then move on. Because like I was thinking we could start from the 30s because the 30s is like Superman and Batman. You know what I mean? Like this is the origin of that stuff. And then like just to highlight, like 60s were, the birth of basically the Marvel universe. Marvel existed as timely prior to that, but really, the Fantastic Four. What was it? 61 is that kind
61
of when
is the Fantastic Four, and then Spider-Man.
That's like I think they call that what the Silver Age.
Yeah, because I think Fantastic Four was the birth of the Silver Age.
Yeah,
well, actually, the Silver Age. I think the Silver Age starts
or is it Flash?
With DC. Yeah, with DC.
Yeah, with the Flash, that's right.
Yeah.
With the Flash and Green Lantern. And basically that inspired Marvel to do what they did, which go more into the superhero genre. And I think it was the, if I'm not mistaken, it was the Justice League book that birthed the Fantastic Four.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yep. They wanted an answer to their Justice League, and the Fantastic Four was what
Yeah.
they came up with.
Yeah, according to this thing I'm looking at, Golden Age is 38 to 56. Silver Age, which is 56 to 70. Bronze Age is 70 to 85, and then 85. The Modern Age is 85 to present day.
Okay.
See, but those eras, like from 85 to now,
I think there's multiple eras in that.
Yeah, that's like 50 or well, my math isn't real good, but it's 40.
No, it would be from like
years.
90, no, like 30, like 35 years,
I
right?
would
So
say
if you just round it up to 90, 90, 2000, and then 2024, that's 34 years. So basically 34 years defines the modern, right? The modern era of comics.
And I would think we could break that down even a little bit into eras in itself, because obviously the last 10 years of comics have been a lot different than the 90s and even the early 2000s.
Well, I don't think the modern comics that are coming out now should be included in that modern, because they're so different. They definitely need their own heading, like this more SJW type of books.
Yeah.
I don't think they should be included in the 90s and
on,
the early
the
2000s.
Era.
Yeah, the early 2000s, because the early 2000s, like 2000 to 2010, comics were still pretty good.
Oh yeah, there was fun stuff coming out then for sure.
Yeah, the Ultimates were coming out. Marvel was pushing formats and stuff like that. And so there's some good stuff. So anyways, you guys, as always, Pontificators is very interactive. So if you guys have a favorite decade, or if you want to, contribute to the conversation, feel free. It's just going to be fun. We're not going to get like too hung up on, actual dates and numbers and stuff like that. But we're just going to have fun with it, and then try to come up with some kind of consensus at the end of this. Try to figure out, well, what really is the best, like just based on the merits that we can throw out here on the show. So, yeah, without further ado, you guys, if you're there, smash and like. I know there's a lot of competition tonight. Wait. So I'm going to have to back the Volume 1, Volume 2 High Octane Adventure tier of Black and White. That'd be great, man. That's all 3 of the Black and White books. And I've been talking to Pedro about for the next Black and White campaign, which is going to be called Sins of the Father. And we're going to do it the same way, Volume 1, Volume 2. I want to do another High Octane Adventure, because Pedro is just so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I would like another animated adventure story. And those are fun, because sometimes when you do these books with the campaign, it's like you're tempted to go, well, let's tell this guy's story, or like, and then it kind of enhances the story proper that you're telling. I want the High Octanes to be one and dones and unto themselves. You know what I mean? Just like a fun adventure that doesn't necessarily have to do with the continuity of, the books that I'm, overseeing and writing. So I just want them to be fun and independent of that. So that's what I'm looking for the High Octane in the future. So, okay, 1930. Okay, so we got the 30s, right? So we have National Periodical, who pretty much ruled the action adventure landscape. So we have Dr. Occult, we have Slam Bradley, we have Superman, we have Zatara, we have Tex Thompson, who I've never heard of, Crimson Avenger, and there's a little character named Batman, Red Tornado, and Sandman. So this is early 30s. So basically the 30s created the superhero. Right. So everybody, I think, is in agreement that Superman is the guy.
Yeah. Was Superman 38? Does that sound right?
Oh, my gosh. I don't know.
Or was he earlier than that? 38 seems to ring a bell with me first.
It was definitely, the stuff was late 30s.
April 18th, 1938. You're right.
Oh, okay.
Well, also that was standard reason, because that was the birth of the Golden Age. So the birth of the Golden Age was when Superman hit the scene.
Yeah, Superman really started the ball rolling, and then obviously Detective 27 and Batman shows up, and they kind of changed the landscape of things.
Yeah, Wiz Comics, we got Captain Marvel.
As much as people loved.
Fawcett was the Captain Marvel book was probably the best-selling book of its time.
Yeah,
right?
Captain Marvel
it was
was
outselling
huge.
Superman.
Yep, it was every bit as big, if not bigger, and that's the lawsuit then.
1.4 million copies per issue.
Yeah.
Holy
Ooh,
shit.
man, how nice would be having them numbers now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
where's my royalty checks on that?
Yeah, that's still making money the hard way because they're 10 cents each, right? But could you imagine
Those
if they
numbers.
were the current time,
Oh God.
with the money, like I don't know, $5.
1.4 million for a $5.99 comic. That's like, I'm no mathematician, but that's a lot.
Well, how many books do you say? 4 million?
1.4 million copies per issue.
1.4. Okay.
And this was
So
back in
almost a million,
1939.
almost $1.5 million. Okay.
Yep.
So if that was $1, that would be 1,400,000.
400,000.
400 or 500,000, whatever.
Yep.
Holy shit balls.
Yeah, they were moving comics back then.
Yeah, current books would be 5 million something. Yeah. Over $5 million. Yeah. So, but the thing is, like comics of the old, I've heard these arguments about competition. There was less competition, and as a whole, people read more. You know, they read the newspaper, they read comic books, novels.
Reading was the main form of entertainment for sure. So yeah.
There was radio,
magazines, periodicals, newspaper. Everybody was reading.
And there was radio. Yeah, there was radio, and so even some of the early adventures, like Superman stuff, was serialized as radio shows, things like that. A lot of the Superman mythology was created on the radio show, so so there was it was still being created. You know, the concept was still being fleshed out, and so the 30s are pretty damn important. So.
Art, do you think there was writers trying to break into comics so that they could become radio show writers? Back then. It's like, I don't really like comics, but I really want to work in radio.
But what I really want is to do radio. Yeah, yeah.
This could be a stepping stone job for me.
Yeah, I wonder what the pay for radio. I bet it was good, you know.
Oh, radio! I'm sure there's a ton of advertising, so there was advertising money in it.
Yeah, and there was it was everywhere.
Drink your Ovaltine.
Hell yeah. Hell yeah. Okay, so now we have the 40s. All right, like the 40s, I don't know, is it a continuation of the same old? Like, I don't really know the 40s at all.
Well, here, the difference here would be World War II and Captain America. That would probably be the biggest thing that comes out of the 40s era is Captain America as a U.S. propaganda comic. You printed out and sent all the soldiers overseas, and Captain America that's where Captain America became a big deal, and as known as Superman and Batman.
Yeah, and then there was the Invaders, right? So there was Toro and the Human Torch,
Submariner.
and then there was Submariner.
Yeah. The Shield comic was out about the same time.
Was that Sergeant Fury and the Howling Commandos kind of thing? Was that era then?
Yeah,
there was more war comics then. War comics were obviously more popular. Not G.I. Joe, but
like Nick Fury and the Howling Commandos, Sergeant Rock.
Yeah, that was
Sergeant
definitely
Rock. That's the one I was thinking from DC.
You know what's amazing is DC was still publishing those war comics through the 70s. You know, I remember as a kid seeing Ghost Tank and Sergeant Rock, and I can't think of any of the other. There was Ghost Tank.
Well, there was some nostalgia stuff going on for the war, so they had Korea and Vietnam to work off of, and still World War II.
Actually, Sergeant Rock didn't start until 1959.
59 during Korea, then probably, or around that era. I don't know.
Yeah,
exactly.
I was gonna say, I think that stuff came later. So, but Nick Fury, Sergeant Fury, that came out earlier, right?
Here, I'm checking. I'm checking on that. Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, probably May 1963.
Oh, so that was even later then. So those were all 20-year later war stories.
Okay, so that's us projecting onto those earlier wars. But I think those, like Sergeant Rock and stuff, those were those wars. So they were already they weren't making those stories while the war was going on. they were making these stories
Those
after the wars were over.
War comics were like still popular. I mean, you look at MASH. MASH was in the 70s about, you know, the Korean War in the 50s. So it's kind of, there's a whole era of stuff where that stuff is still popular.
But the thing is, the reason I wanted to give to Nick Fury or Sergeant Fury is because wouldn't it be cool if he actually was in that timeline? And then, you know, so when you did Agent or Nick Fury, you know, the SHIELD stuff and all that other, you know, good stuff, and the spy agency and all that, that was in the 60s. So then actually the character did have its roots authentically in that timeline, which, you know, for right or wrong, it would have been cool. There's one thing about Nick Fury that I never understood. Okay, they go, okay, he's a war hero. But then was he captured in time, you know, like frozen, like Captain America?
I think they got real loosey-goosey about timelines then. I don't think there was ever a real clear explanation.
No, there was. It was something called
retroactively there was an explanation.
And in like the 70s, I think is when they came up with it, where he had like, it was basically a derivative of the super soldier serum. That they were trying to recreate the super soldier serum, and it was called like the God, I can't remember, like the immortal serum or something like that. Because and that's why Nick Fury didn't age.
Oh, okay, that would make sense then.
That seems like a major cop out, though.
Well, yeah, there's a few. It's like I fell in that same ocean that Steve Rogers was in, and I just froze for
Infinity Formula.
Slightly less time than he did.
Okay, so the 50s weren't so much the height of. Well, maybe there were like war comics in the 50s, but they just really weren't Marvel and DC or Marvel and Timely. I mean, Timely and DC or National at the time. So I'm trying to identify like the 40s and the 50s. So the 40s would be, can we say they were the birth of war comics? Is that the 40s contribution? I'm trying to figure out what would define that decade.
I would say war comics and Captain America's appearance for the 40s. For the 50s, the 50s, I think, because Captain America again disappears for a while after war comics aren't popular.
I remember what they called this. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, man.
No, it's fine.
They called it the Atomic Age. Because in the 50s, from the mid 50s, up to like the 60s, because that's like radiation and stuff like that is what created heroes. So they refer to that. They sometimes refer to that as the Atomic Age.
Well, I mean, in real life, the Atomic Age, but I don't know if I ever.
And
I know comics actually did use the phrase, but it was never used to define a decade, right? Yeah. The Atomic Age.
There were some people that referred to it like that.
I'm trying to think of what comics were really hot or popular in the 50s, because this is pre-Fantastic Four, pre the launch of the Silver Age with Flash and Green Lantern. So, like Superman and Batman. Superman is still around. Batman's still around in the 50s, and those are probably the biggest superhero comics, but Marvel hadn't even really established itself yet.
No, yeah.
And is this like more when like Archie was popular, or those type of cartoon comics were a little bit more popular?
That's what I'm finding. Like, yeah, in the 50s, I can share this with you.
Woody Woodpecker and that.
Yeah, that's what I'm finding. Yeah. So hold on, let me
There's
find.
A lot of what is it called? Like the Dennis the Menace and
Dennis the Menace was a big deal like that.
Then.
What was the Archie stuff, like was it little Hot Stuff and Casper and
the more the cartoon type comics.
Yeah. So Dennis the Menace, we got Pat the Brat. I never ever heard of this comic.
Dude, I'm looking at this. I haven't heard of half of these things.
So this is like Dennis the Menace, right? This is just kind of this kid looks actually evil. It is kind of a take on Dennis the Menace, though.
Oh, totally. It's a total ripoff of Dennis the Menace.
And then we have Pipsqueak. That's an adorable drawing right there. We won. This is Archie Comics, The Adventures of Pipsqueak. is this like girl power, or is that a boy? Brat the Pat, or Pat the Brat,
Little
Pipsqueak.
Jinx. So yeah, it was a series of mischievous kids.
Okay.
Little Jinx.
Little Jinx. Oh my gosh, that banana, what is that, a quadruple banana split? And look at this guy. The artist was like on it. Look at his signature. You can't.
You
can't
remember?
yeah.
mistake that.
Do you
Takes
remember
up a quarter of the page.
what was it? My daddy said Little Lulu.
Yeah.
Remember that one?
Oh, no, Little Archie.
Yeah, little Lulu, Melvin the Mom. There were a lot of kids acting out back then.
Yeah.
Today it'd be like getting the shit smacked out of them.
This is definitely Dennis the Menace rip. Look at the mom and dad.
Oh,
the guy's
100%.
got the
This is
angular face.
Oh, 100%.
This was the popular genre. They had Dennis the Menace was a hit, and then what does every other publisher do? It's like the bad girl craze when Lady Death became popular. It's like, oh, let's copy that. Let's make our version of that character. So obviously, Melvin the Monster.
Yeah, this is Atlas Comics. I know, like Atlas, when I was a kid, I collected, but I don't remember them doing cartoon books. But of course, this is before my. No, this is getting into. Wow, this doesn't just cover the 40s or whatever. This goes all the way up to the. 50s.
Yeah, Casper the Friendly Ghost would have been a big hit in this era too.
This is all 50s.
Yeah.
This is not 40s.
Yeah, so this is probably what the hot comics were in that era of the 50s, is more of these cartoon, almost like your Sunday morning cartoon type characters.
Well, 56. It's just another ripoff of
there was
of
no
a ripoff.
good kids. Apparently, there was no good kids in comics in the 50s.
So I was looking at like just like going back to the World War II thing. I'm looking at like the top comics from there, and like got stuff like the Fighting Yank and
Willie the Wise Guy,
Spy Smasher, Wonder Woman in Sensation Comics.
And what
Dexter the Demon.
Oh my God! What decade was that you're talking about, Bob?
I was talking like I'm just going back to the World War II, like the other books that were out besides Captain America and the Shield and stuff like that.
Okay, so that's the 40s. So yeah, we're still trying to figure.
Miss Fury, which was it Billy Tucci that did a relaunch of that recently?
I think so.
Dynamite has the license for that one. So Tucci might have done it through them.
Yeah, but Miss Fury debuted in 1944.
Okay. This publishing company is called Me. That's weird. Pete the Pan. Oh, Pete.
So this must have been what was popular, and all these little publishers were trying to cash in.
Yeah,
on Dennis the Menace. This is horrible,
dude. Talk about like everyone's like, no, Marvel copied DC and DC copied Marvel. Dude, everybody was copying everybody.
Oh yeah, everybody was trying to make a buck on whatever was popular at the time.
Look, you couldn't even call little girls brats. You had to call them little angel, but basically being sarcastic.
Oh my God,
little brat,
super brat, little tomboy.
Well, you guys get the idea.
Yeah, so this is what the 50s were all about. This when comics were probably dying off by the glut of all the cookie cutter sameness.
But look at how many different type publishing was it? Fago. I don't even know what half these.
Each one of them had like a different publisher.
Little Ike. Wait a minute! I never heard of this. This is not real.
Little Kids.
Calvin, 1970 by Marvel. Little Kids introducing Calvin.
Brian Norton. Actually, Casper was around 1952, I think, is what it says.
Well, now we're getting into the modern era with Bert Simpson.
Yeah, but I think that's more like the kid friendly books. So the 40s are basically like the biggest claim to fame as far as we're concerned is Captain America.
Yeah.
So the 50s, late 50s was the birth of the Silver Age. So like 50, 55, 56, or 50, it was 56, right?
Yeah, 55, 56 is, I believe, what they said.
Okay, so then we have the 50s. So, 50s comics were, what was Timely, right? Timely was in the 50s.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of the Marvel stuff that before they became Marvel. But what DC did, I think the 50s were really significant. Later 50s is because of the Golden Age. So it was like the new version of the Flash, the new Green Lantern, the new Atom, and it was for the modern audience. And then instead of the Justice Society, it was now the Justice League. I heard the story was that the publisher liked baseball. So he liked that they were leagues, like baseball had leagues.
Oh, sure.
So instead of a society, he called it a league. So that's Justice League came out of that. So basically the mid 50s up till the 60s were ruled by DC Comics with their revamping, and basically creating the golden age, which got us out of, some of the funkier stuff. So I think that's real significant with the 50s.
Well, we also the 50s is when the comic book code of authority went into effect.
Yeah. So what year was Wortham's or whatever that BS with the Comics Code Authority and
1954.
Okay. So just before DC basically recreated comic books or superhero comics at least. Pretty cool. So I would have to say that the latter half of the 50s were pretty significant with the golden age, with DC basically giving a template for more modern, a more modern take on superheroes, which didn't last very long because now we're the 60s. So early 60s, 61 was, Marvel's, grab at superheroes. So there was the Fantastic Four. Yep. So basically Marvel took the DC template, and then mirrored that with the Fantastic Four. So I've heard interviews where they said basically the Justice League were the inspiration for the Fantastic Four. And then I heard that the Thing was just kind of a holdover because Marvel was doing, like monster comics.
Oh, yeah.
So they added a monster, which was the Thing, into the group just in case, just to hedge their bet, right? It's like we're not totally putting all of our eggs in this one basket. We still have a monster, in the book. So I would say, would you guys, even though there was Batmania in the mid 60s, would you say that the 60s were kind of defined by Marvel?
Oh yeah.
I think DC, like you said, DC made the template, and then Marvel took it and just ran with it.
Yeah, and had that different. Obviously Stan's writing style, making it more set in the modern world.
And the art really took a jump up too.
Yeah. So Marvel. The birth of Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, the rest of the Marvel universe. That is the key part of what the 60s brought. I would say more so than anything.
And up till the mid 60s, like Marvel basically built the whole, universe that we know and love now. And the thing that Marvel did that was better than DC is DC's characters, their Achilles heel was still external. So it was the color yellow or fire or kryptonite or something like that. But Marvel's main Achilles heel was them. It was, there it was internal, like personality flaws. Like Peter Parker, was more like concerned about family, things like that.
He was like selfless to a fault.
Yeah, and then like it was just more internal. Like Iron Man's the easy one, like he was this guy that was making money off of war, creating weapons and stuff like that. So he has a change of heart,
they were more humanized. Like their flaws were stuff that people could relate to. Where Superman is this perfect icon, and like other than him working at the Daily Planet and his secret identity, there wasn't that much internal strife with Superman. And Batman too is like this crime fighting icon. Yeah, like Tony Stark is a perfect example, and obviously Peter Parker is the prototypical, like everyman that anybody that's reading comics can relate to their problems. I've got to get money to pay the rent. I got to keep my job at the Daily Bugle.
He was kind of the first one to do that, right?
Does she like me? All that stuff that's way more relatable than what Superman and Batman's problems were going through. So
he was the kid that had to take care of his family, his Aunt May, because the patriarchy, the father.
It was different type of
His
storytelling.
uncle
sure.
was gone now, so there was a lot of things at play. But yeah, they were more emotional and relatable. But that's also why I think that the Marvel Universe cinematically is doing really well, because up to the last phase or two is because there was relatability, because it was built into the character. Their weakness were these things, internal things, but the DC universe was always external. So one, I think it carries over decades, and the other is basically becomes a cliche. Once the Marvel universe came out, the DC stuff kind of became the cliche. Oh, kryptonite! You could be Superman just whipping out a piece of this rock, or you could bring out fire and take down the Martian Manhunter, or whatever these silly the color yellow stuff was done. And so I would say, like, we really, even though there was Batmania, right? So 66 was the TV show.
That was Batman, more the TV show, probably.
The comics were selling like freaking hotcakes. So DC was probably doing very well financially because of the Batmania of the 60s. But I think as far as just defining the decade, I would have to say that it would be Marvel, especially like the first half of the 60s.
I think Marvel. I mean, I think DC, like I said, I think DC created the template, but Marvel took it and just freaking ran with it. And you look at and then like that era too. Like, we're talking about the most important era. That era is when literally like the start of the superstar artist. Because you had Jack Kirby, Gil Kane, Steve Ditko, Gene Colon, Carmen Infantino,
and you had Kurt Swan on Superman.
John Buscema, John Romita Jr. And then towards the end of that era, you got Neil Adams, Barry Windsor Smith, all these other guys that came out of the Silver Age. Like the Silver Age, it's almost like the Golden Age created the comic book phenomenon. The Silver Age is what defined it.
Man, this is becoming kind of easier than I thought, because right off the bat I was thinking, the 60s have to be, the decade. But we'll continue. We got some coverage, because I posed this question on Graham Nolan's stream just before we went live with the Pontificators, and there was a lot of 90s. So there was a kind of a cross between 60s and 90s. So now we're 70s. So 70s. Marvel, kind of the sales were going down, I heard, and so that's what gave birth to a lot of the more unique heroes, like Ghost Rider, Son of Satan, Brother Voodoo, Morbius, more of the like monster stuff. They kind of went more into that horror genre.
Definitely.
It's almost like they started off doing a lot of supernatural stuff back in the Golden Age. They changed from that to doing more science fiction, science-based stuff in the Silver Age, and then in the 70s, towards the end of that era, they went back to supernatural.
Yeah, so that's the Bronze Age. So the 70s, always think it's the Bronze Age.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do remember those books, because at that point I was old enough to make my own money. So I do remember going to Spinner Rack and just getting a bunch of those Marvel books, number one Ghost Rider, even Son of Satan. I have all those things. So it was a fun time, but I heard like financially, Marvel wasn't writing as high. That's why they gave the Lunatics the asylum, right? That's when they gave all those young guys, just said, come up with stuff. And you know what? That is a smart ass move. You know what I mean? Trust your creators, and then just kind of throw your hands up in the air and say, throw a pitch together. Let's hear what you got, and that's what those guys were doing. Like Marv Wolfman, Lynn Wein, that's when those guys came up to prominence and, started, just banging out, some great comic books. So what was DC doing in the 70s? They were doing the 100-page specials, right?
There was 100-page specials, yeah. Superman and Batman, the world's finest 100-page specials with backup stories of the Flash and Red Tornado. I remember, and every story would have a backup story.
Well, those backup stories were reprints, so that there would always be the lead story would be new, and then the rest would be like, like reprints of older material.
Well,
and
sure.
as a kid, when I got that, I didn't understand stylistically why the styles were changing so much. You know what I mean? It'd be like Neil Adams doing the cover, like he'd be fighting a werewolf, and that would be the lead story, and then he does the first story, and then you go back to like the early 50s or whatever, and you're like, what the hell? This is weird.
Isn't the 70s when Kirby jumped to DC?
Yes.
Yeah, that might have been New Gods and Commandy
Yeah.
and all that stuff. Yeah, probably.
Ooh, that's a good call there, Bob.
I couldn't remember exactly when it was, but it was literally like this, like the beginning of the 70s is when it happened, right?
It's funny because like one of their mainstay creators, which was Jack Kirby in the 70s, they mistreated the guy. He went over to DC, created some iconic stuff, and then they threw their hands up and then just gave all these new guys, the go ahead to make these new titles like Ghost Rider and all these Brother Voodoo. So that is funny, like that Marvel did kind of have a little, not so much a renaissance, because I don't think those things sold that well, the more supernatural horror books. But to be honest, I don't know if the New Gods and all that stuff
Kirby's DC stuff never really kind of hit the way his stuff that he had created at Marvel did. But if I'm not mistaken, I mean, now we're getting to the late 70s, so it's still the era of the 70s, but the late 70s is, I think, when Claremont takes over on X-Men, and they bring in the new X-Men with Cockrum at that point, if I'm not mistaken. And I would
think
say
you're right, late 70s, yes.
That's a major, like Claremont going on the X-Men, revamping the whole team, having the island of Genosha, getting rid of.
Well, the X-Men were never. That book had been canceled, I think, 2 or 3 times before.
Yeah, because they were all reprints. They were reprinting Neil Adams issues, I think, with Cyclops.
Yeah. So it was the take on the X-Men that actually connected. Which was the Claremont run. But even
turned
before
the X-Men into what the X-Men were.
Right. But the thing is, like the annual, the one that started the new X-Men, that was written by Lynn Wein, wasn't it?
Oh, you're right. Yeah, Lynn Wein did the giant size X-Men.
Yeah, giant size X-Men.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when Claremont.
So how many issues did Lynn Wein write after that?
Yeah, I thought Claremont. Yeah,
because all those new X-Men, I don't know how. I know that Lynn. I'm pretty sure he was the editor of the book too. So there's a little double dip in there, but yeah, the new
issue 94 of the new X-Men series. So
he only did one issue.
That was written by who?
That's when Chris Claremont took over.
Of 94.
No, how many issues did Marv write then? Do you have the database?
I'm trying to find it here. So
I think you're right about the giant size X-Men #1.
Yeah, giant size X-Men #1 was created by Len Wein and Dave Cockrum.
I know that for a fact, but I could have swore that Lynn was writing after that as well, because I don't think he just handed it over to Claremont after that, right?
And issue 94.
I know I bought those. I don't remember who was the writer on it. I definitely know Cockrum is the one. He crossed over to the ongoing after that annual.
So, okay, 94 was released in.
And that was Marvel. Jerry Roscoe says 70s was the era of licensed comics, Star Wars, and Conan. And Marvel was doing Aliens, and they had the Epic. The Epic line came out in the 70s too, right?
Late so 70s. X-Men 93 looks like it still might have been a reprint.
Yeah, 93 was a reprint. Yeah, 94 was the first new one.
Cover. So in 94 was the first Claremont. Claremont probably took over after Giant Size.
Yep.
Okay, so Lynn just introduced everything.
Yep.
And then Claremont came and started writing after that. Okay.
But Lynn stayed on as the editor.
Okay.
Well, that makes sense.
Because I think a lot of those characters, the creation of those characters, if I'm not mistaken, are credited to Lynn.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, Wolverine was created prior to that in the Hulk, and but
Yeah.
although that was who was writing the Hulk at that time, that might have been Len with Herb Trimp art, or God, my memory being sorry.
I think it was Herb. I think Herb did do the
Yeah.
that issue,
So
but I'm
those
not
two might
sure.
get, yeah. So then he would get the creation for most of those new X-Men. I mean, Colossus and Nightcrawler for sure. Aurora. I'm not sure if Sunfire was around already. He might have already been around.
So Jerry Roscoe says, but Jack's second era with Marvel was the 70s as well. Think Captain America. I didn't like those books. I think I just blanked that time out of my head. But you're right. He did go back. So I don't know
Yeah,
how long his
that was
run.
post Commandy, post New Gods. He goes back to Marvel and has
Right.
a big Captain America run.
Right. And I'm trying to think when Pacific Comics came out. So that's the precursor to Image Comics. And I do believe that was late. No, it might have been early 80s. I'm going to look that up. Pacific Comics. What decade was that?
Yeah, Sunfire was created by Roy Thomas and Don Hick in 1970. First appeared in Uncanny X-Men 64. So he was created long before they took over.
Yeah,
Who
5
was?
years before
Sunfire. That character was created before the X-Men Giant Size X-Men #1.
Yeah, which was the guy they killed off right away?
Oh,
Thunderbird.
Thunderbird, yeah.
Thunderbird, not Warpath. Thunderbird, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I got Pacific Comics here. So Pacific Comics was a comic book distributor and publisher active from the 70s to 84. So if you guys don't remember, it was probably in the 80s. This was the Shanus brothers, Steve and Bill, and you might know those guys from the Comics Buyer's Guide, and I think it was Diamond Distributors. They put out it says 70, 79. Let me see. Experiment and expansion. Okay, 1983, Pacific upgraded to paper, higher quality ink. Pacific's innovations in creator-owned properties and high-quality printing were soon imitated by the industry leaders, Marvel and DC. So another entry was that Dave Stevens' Rocketeer was first published by Pacific Comics. So I think that was late 80s or not late 80s, late 70s, early 80s. Because it says the Shanuses asked Kirby, who had effectively quit comics in 78 for only the publishing rights. This is to some of his older stuff, which says in the paragraph before, that he could keep full ownership and copyright. And he said they would even help him license characters for use overseas and other media. Thus, Pacific claims to have become the first company to pay royalty payments to Kirby. I did not know that.
Oh.
Kirby provided Pacific with Captain Victory and the Galactic Rangers, which was published bi-monthly from August 81 through the Shanus' anticipated sales for less than 25,000. The first issue sold 110,000 copies. Kirby then let Pacific publish the Silver Star, and the brothers decided to start a line of full-color mainstream comics. So they started with the Kirby, Captain Victory, and Silver Star. And then they brought in Mike Grill, who did the Star Slayer, Dave Stevens, who did the Rocketeer, and they had Neil Adams. They had all kinds of A-list. They had Bernie Wrightson. They had all kinds of A-list guys going there. So it was Image Comics before Image, and even it was San Diego. So I was breaking in because I used to go to their offices when I was trying to get in and hang out with the Shanus brothers. And so I do remember that. So that was late 70s, early 80s. So I don't know if we should probably put it into the 80s. Because they were doing work, but that Captain Victory book didn't come out to 81. So we'll put that into the 80s. So where should we end with the 70s then? So the 70s.
Well,
Was the X-Men? Is that where we kind of left off?
I think
Yeah, we left
Claremont taking over X-Men is pretty big thing in comic. If we're going historically in comics, that was kind of a game shifter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
or at least a point of interest for the success of comics and the writer becoming more high profile too, probably.
right, and that was the 70s. So now we're into the 80s. So 80s, we've already said that Pacific Comics, early 80s, create your own rights, create your own IPs.
Cocaine.
What's that?
Mhm.
Cocaine.
Cocaine was
general
big.
hand in hand in the 80s.
It's also when comics started getting dark.
Yeah, I would say
that's
that.
when we get Dark Knight Returns. Dark Phoenix Saga was in 1980.
Well, the graphic novel took off.
Yeah,
like
the
that was the
graphic
80s.
novel in general. Yeah, it was a new thing in the 80s, definitely.
Yeah, so like Watchmen, Dark Knight Returns,
yeah,
all the year one stuff. I think, Bob, if you can, you're a lot faster than I am. Look up when the Infinity Crisis happened.
That was 90. I think that was 91. Let me double check.
Yeah,
no, it was before I broke into the
Secret Wars was first, though. I think Secret Wars.
Oh no, you're thinking Crisis of Infinite
Crisis on
Crisis of Infinite Earths was the 80s. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, Crisis of Infinite Earths and Secret Wars was maybe Marvel's trying to answer to that.
I don't know which one came first.
Crisis of Infinite Earths was first, for sure.
Yeah, 1985 to 1986 was Crisis of Infinite Earths.
Okay, so that was the Marv Wolfman, George Perez, freaking epic.
Yeah.
That blew my mind.
Yeah, they took, and that's when because they had so many different like universes that they just collapsed it all into one.
Yeah, they were trying to simplify the multiverse and get rid of the multiverse. And then, of course, they, that lasted for about 2 seconds. But
okay.
Well, so another thing in that time frame is Watchmen.
Yeah.
So there was like huge epic Crisis of Infinite Earths and Watchmen were like 2 epic comic book series, and then obviously, Dark Knight Returns, 3 epic comic.
And then
book
all
series.
the year one books that came out of the Crisis stuff.
Byrne
So you're right.
Superman.
You're right, Bob. Like comics, they went dark, but they I would say more they grew up, right?
They grew up the readers,
right. So the readers were aging up, so they were kind of making comics to I think they were kind of giving up on like trying to get the kids in the market, because also we haven't discussed is there was a direct market newsstand thing that happened. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that was in the 80s. Sometime.
Yeah, this was probably where comic shops, individual comic book shops, became more prevalent. In the early 80s, they started popping up, and the direct market. I mean, there was probably comic book shops in the 70s, but not to the point, not to where it got to in the 80s. Like 80s comics was a boom era for sure.
Yeah, comic shops in the 70s and stuff, they weren't really comic shops. They would be like a store that there was one of their sons or something like that had its comic collection and would sell in the back
books and antiques, and we've got some old comic books
old
over
comics
in the
here.
Look at them.
That's where I got most of my back issues. So I think like the 80s, we're still in the Bronze era. So
a lot of people refer to that as the Copper era. It's like it's still the Bronze era, but it's starting to lead more towards like I said, there was a comic book shift in that area. Like that's when like books like you said, like Watchmen, Crisis in Infinite Earths, New Teen Titans, Judas Contract, Wolverines, started his own title. That's when we started getting some of these. Like Dark Knight Returns, like I said, the more grown up stuff.
Yeah, and they were kind of headed that way. So there had been comics sporadically up to that point, but I would say that was like a big focus. So 80s was pretty much like coming of age, for comics, like aging up, getting a little bit more adult in subject matter and possibly a little darker as well. Because also wasn't there DC launched? Oh my gosh, it's been so long now. Vertigo was Vertigo in?
Yeah, we got some Vertigo stuff. We started getting indie books, like TMNT.
The indie market, yeah.
Yeah,
that's
the
right.
indie
that was
market,
another big thing. The black and white
Black and
indie
white.
market
Yeah,
with Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and
Actually, this is
Hellboy.
This is going to be tougher than I thought.
Yeah.
So the 80s is going to give a
was
run for
Hellboy
the
in the
money.
80s, or I
I
suppose
think
late 80s Hellboy might have first shown up.
No,
Well,
I think it
would
was
say
later.
90s for Hellboy.
It was mid 90s, yeah.
Let me double check.
Yeah,
it was actually early 90s. It was in early 90s, so I'm wrong on that one.
Yeah, because
Dark Horse wasn't even around in the early 80s
right.
yet, I don't think.
No, I hadn't broke in. Like I broke in, I think 84. So that's
another one of the like titular moments of Art T. Bear enters the comic book industry.
Yeah.
That's we got books like Cerberus, TMNT, Nexus.
Oh yeah. So the indie market was like, it was a legitimate indie market. And this is probably because of the comic book direct market with comic book shops now. Because those guys weren't going to get on newsstands probably very easily, but they could get into comic book shops there.
Well, when you sell, like Pacific early on, when you sell 110,000 copies of Captain Victory, that's noteworthy for indie. And there was like Eclipse Comics, there was First Comics, there was like Flag, American Flag. There was Grimjack.
Crusade that did who is it that did books like Badger and Faust and all that?
Was that first? I think that was first, right? No.
Yeah, it could be.
Actually, Nexus was truly independent. No.
Yeah, I think so.
I think the first stuff was just published like as Vanity Press, but I do think later First picked them up. But I'm not 100% sure.
Let me see here.
So we have the 80s. So let's move.
Oh shit, Miracle Man! I forgot about that.
Adult comics. Alan Moore. That British invasion happened then as well with Neil Gaiman and
Elric. Oh yeah, man, I forgot about a lot of this stuff.
Elric of Memnorn.
Yeah, the Crow was like late 80s, 1989.
Wow, I didn't know that book was that old.
Yeah. Oh, that book is old as shit.
Yeah, because the movies came out in the 90s, so it had to develop a while before it got optioned, I'm sure.
Actually, Dark Horse started in 1986.
Oh, was it that far back?
Yeah, 1986.
Oh, that surprises me. I thought it was more early 90s, late,
that's
89, 90.
That's about right. What was the publisher's name?
Michael Richardson.
Michael Richardson, yeah. I remember Artist Alley. I think this was the first year that I had broke in the business. And I remember him in Artist Alley, and there was like Boris the Bear or something. He had some kind of independent idea, and he was shopping that around. And I remember him showing that to me, and I was like, "Oh, okay.
Shit!" I forgot. Matt Wagner had a bunch of stuff. He had Grendel started in 82. Yeah. Mage started in 84. Geez, man, a lot of shit that I forgot about. Mike Barron, Badger started in 83.
So there was a big indie boom. I mean, there was a lot of things happening there. So there was the black and white boom, and then there was Pacific Comics and First Comics, Epic. What was the one? It was oh my gosh, it was a publishing company, and it was the manager of the Dodgers, his son.
Tony La Russa's son?
No. Oh my gosh, what was it? Kamiko? Was that it? Kamiko Comics?
I don't know how it's pronounced. Comico?
Yeah, Comico. And that was they got a lot of licenses, like the Green Hornet stuff and things like that.
I kind of remember that, yeah.
Yeah, I think what was it one of the ones we were just talking about was originally Comico.
They had the Elementals, right? Was that?
Yeah, Elementals was a big one. Comico got the license for Johnny Quest, and they were
they doing the Married with Children comic?
I
remember there was, and I don't know if that would have been the 80s or if it would have been the 90s
see
now.
Comico. See,
'Cause I
Mage.
worked
Oh,
with a guy-
Mage. Mage originally started as a comical book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh,
and
that's
then,
right. That's right. I remember the logo on there. Yeah.
Chuck Dixon had a book there called Evangeline. I don't think that lasted very long. Billingham's, yeah, the Elementals. They had a bunch of like crossover books from like anime, like Evangelion and Robotech and stuff like that.
Well, when was the that was the 90s when the Japanese influence came into mainstream, right? So that's more the 90s. All right, well let's move to the 90s. So the 80s were pretty influential. There was a lot of stuff that went on
a
in the
lot of
80s.
stuff happened.
Okay, so 90s now we're in the modern age, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So 90s obviously there was
the rise of Image.
Yeah, the rise of Image. Books were like there was the speculators that came in like the early 90s.
Superstar Artist probably first before the rise of Image, but this was literally the day of the Superstar Artist. Todd McFarlane was probably the first, I would say, his run on Spider-Man, and people can tell me if I'm wrong, but that predated like anything, even Rob on X or on New Mutants or Jim on X-Men. It was Todd first on Spider-Man, right?
Yeah, because I think Jim was on Alpha Flight at the time.
Yep. And that was like early 90s. So that was like probably the first big inkling pre-image of the rise of the superstar creator, the rise of the superstar artist. And I think that just flowed right through the 90s creation of Image, the creation of the comic book artist becoming a bigger star than they'd ever been in the past.
Yeah. And
probably due to conventions. I would say also the other thing is comic book conventions becoming bigger than they've ever been before ties right in with the superstar artist in the 90s. Is those two things kind of went hand in hand. Comic book conventions, Wizard World was massive.
Yeah.
Wizard Magazine promoted the crap out all these guys. Like all this stuff tied in together.
Yeah, comic book creators became rock stars.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was like Beatlemania, like those cons. It was like Beatlemania. It was absolutely just insane.
And we had like
screaming and
lines as long as you could see.
Yeah.
God.
And the speculator, and then also this all ties together. The speculator market. I want the hot artist on the hot character. I'm going to buy multiple copies of these books. I'm going to go to the convention. I'm going to get it signed by the superstar artist, and I'm going to turn around and sell them because these things are collector's items, signed. All this stuff tied together.
Yeah, and it was the first. It was, as far as I know, the first decade where they really did pander to the collectible market.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. There were books that were like multiple covers. They were enhanced covers, so they were definitely pandering to the more collectible minded people.
Beginning of variant covers by the star artists on books they weren't even working on, just because
covers.
Yeah, they knew it would boost. So yeah, all that stuff kind of tied together and fed on itself.
That's what actually, like, because I got out of comics for about 4 or 5 years. And it was X-Men 275 with that freaking gatefold cover.
X-Men 275 got me back in the comics.
Snatched me back up, man. Yeah. I like. It's funny how like certain things that just have like vivid memories in your head.
Oh yeah, X-Men 275.
Dude, I remember exactly when I saw that freaking book, and my brain went, "Holy shit! Books can talk. Like comic books can look like this."
Yeah.
I was like,
well, the first one was like that was Ronin, right? So,
yeah.
Frank Miller with that big old fold out, of the explosion. That was kind of the first time I saw that, and that blew my mind. But I wanted, like, okay, so the 90s, there was Death of Superman, but like DC really early 90s, they weren't really doing much, right? Like,
yeah.
Dan, what I remember, and this is, you were probably involved in this too, but like Superman was a monthly book. All 4 titles, they were continuing the story throughout. And I was reading a ton of Superman because it basically became a weekly comic with the rotating art team. Dan Jurgens was like the big deal at DC. And
Isn't it also,
Batman was like had Nightfall and Bane, and
That's right. Yeah.
it was the event.
there was big stuff going on at DC too.
The event.
The 90s was the creation of the event.
Yeah, the event, exactly.
Like the crossover event and all that stuff.
Yeah,
like,
you break Batman's back.
Yeah, Crisis, like Infinity Crisis, you know, all that kind of stuff. That stuff started, you know, X-Men: The Extinction Agenda, which crossed over all the X-Men books. But it was also when they started launching multiple titles for different character for the same character. Because you had that's when they had Man of Steel and Superman. So you had 2 Superman books, and then they had Action Comics. Well, and then it just kept adding more and more.
It was action adventure, like you said, Superman, and then Man of Steel.
And then Man of Steel
had 4 titles. Batman had multiple
5.
titles.
Spider-Man, oh my gosh,
Spider-Man had
multiple titles. Yep.
X-Men had 2.
Yeah, that's when they started spreading out the X-Men as much as they could. Yeah.
Well, X-Men like it was just uncanny, but then there was like X Factor.
Yep.
X
Factor, Excalibur, New Mutants, and then eventually the Uncanny X-Men and X-Men.
Generation X.
Wolverine, Cable. You know, we eventually had like 7 or 8 different friggin' X books.
Yeah, massive expanse. So like any hot title got expanded out. Their universe got expanded out. More books.
It was also
even the Punisher had like multiple, you know,
Punisher, Warzone, Punisher. Yeah.
But they also started doing like a shit ton of miniseries. Like Lobo didn't have it. Like Lobo didn't have his own series for a long time. It was just like it was miniseries after miniseries after miniseries after miniseries.
Yeah.
So like 90s was like the 70s and the 80s was when comics like really exploded and grew, and then the 80s when they grew up. 90s is when comics became big business.
Yeah.
And they started like
it wasn't like it was more is better.
Yeah.
More of everything is
flood
better.
the shelves with everything you can get.
Yeah. Let's just glut the market because people are buying it and just keep pumping out material.
If any character had even a remote following, new series or new miniseries.
And one thing I did enjoy, okay, so basically mid 90s, 96, you know, things started, you know, Dwayne, you know, like going downhill as far as sales of the comics. But what I did like is like the late 90s, there was kind of comics were trying to reinvent itself. They were trying to bring substance and story back to comics. So it even went into the early 2000s where it wasn't necessarily like writer centric. It happened a little later, but it was definitely, there was a small window where there were artists and writers and the art team. They were all working towards a common good. You know what I mean? Like storytelling. Yeah. There were still egos, but they weren't as huge. You know what I mean? And then later there was like, I don't know, there became like this vindictive like move for writers to take on and badmouth
the
artists. Yeah. And
Definitely.
so then there was a pissing contest there. And I think there was some good that came out of that, but there was eventually there was a lot of bad. But okay, so 2000s comics became more mainstream. They became more marketed. They became more event oriented. So as far as like the 80s, they kind of grew up, but the 90s kind of paid off, right? There was money all of a sudden.
Yeah. 90s was about getting paid. But there's one other thing that we forgot. 90s was actually the rise of Vertigo.
I thought that was the 80s. I thought I brought that up in the.
It started in the 80s, but the 90s is when Vertigo it really exploded.
A big deal, more so in the 90s. Sandman.
Yeah, but you also but also like the indie curators just exploded too, because you had Hellboy, you had like I said, the Invisibles, you had and it was also they kind of went back again, like they keep going back and forth into the supernatural stuff, you know. because like the Vertigo stuff was almost all supernatural. You had Hellboy's all like supernatural. Then also like Sin City was another book that
there was
exported to.
Concrete, Sin City.
So it's
there
like
was
yeah,
what is it? What was the Art Adams Monkey Man and O'Brien?
Monkey Man and
Monkey
O'Brien.
yeah.
Right. Yeah.
That was a real high concept.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of people that were trying to, like Valiant. There were companies that were trying to emulate the image success.
Art just like drawing gorillas, basically.
Yeah, the Max.
Gorillas and chicks with really long legs.
Sexy women, yeah.
Yeah.
Joe Rose kind of got the same point you were just making their art is 98 to 2003. It's the sweet spot after the implosion where there's a good balance between art and writing on both sides, kind of what you were just talking about.
Yeah, I completely agree.
There was a window after that collapse where, there was like some really good writer-artist combos that worked together.
Yeah, and then go ahead. But then like Bendis and Mark Miller, I'd say like the beginning part of their career, there was this cool like balance between writing and art. But then like somehow, like when I left Marvel after that, oh my gosh, all that stuff just fell apart.
It's when they started thinking like, oh, we're gonna go highbrow, and when you have highbrow stories and you have great writing, you don't need great artists.
Well, I think like like if you look at Michael Bendis. Okay, I think there's writers like Alan Moore. Like when somebody lays out an Alan Moore story, it looks like an Alan Moore story because his writing is dictating panels and everything. So it's very specific. So there's not a lot of room, to elaborate. And so one of the things that Bendis did, not to that extent, but there was layout dictates. Like there's one thing that Bendis did, and this was like, I think his ego just getting the better of him, but he wanted to find something that would define him. And I don't know this for sure. I'm just kind of based on like what I saw, but he would do these double page spreads that would be a conversation between Aunt May and Peter. Why is this a double page spread? Like it would just be multiple talking head, panels. And he would do stuff like that. And the only thing I could figure out is like, well, that's a Michael Bendis comic, right? Visually, when you see something like that, you go, this is Michael Bendis. So there would be dictates like that. And so he started doing more stuff like that. And I think he was kind of believing a little bit of the hype. And also
bullshit.
Yeah, because like one of the things is like the early Ultimates, especially X-Men, was like what he was going to do. It was almost like, what was that TV show? It was called it was all in real time with
24
24 hours. So it was basically an hour per episode, and there were 24 episodes for that season, so it was basically 24 hours, right? And so they kind of went into all the nuances of this timeline, right? And that's kind of like what the Ultimate Spider-Man became. It's like it was almost like every day was presented, because some of those issues, they were slower than slow. Like they were really boring. And so his genius was like, he took time to get Peter into the Spider-Man suit. I think it took 3 issues, right? To have that happen. So he was really exploring every nuanced idea that you could. And so what it felt like is it really felt like that 24 where you were kind of living with these characters. It felt more like a day in the life versus a comic, which is just like 22 pages of heightened action. And then the next month, the same thing, and so on and so forth. It was really kind of serialized. And at first I thought it was interesting, but then it just became, I think, kind of boring.
It became diarrhea it just became diarrhea of the mouth, man. It was just vomiting script onto the page.
And then when writers,
that's how you get guys like freaking what's his name, Tom King.
They're just in love with like they just it's a power play, because they're gonna like this is my writing. So my writing is interesting. So that's why they go with talking heads, because it's an ego thing. Because if they were just like writing like, okay, the next 4 pages are, Superman fights, Mysterio or whatever,
Yeah.
then that doesn't really say anything about their writing. Even though I remember Marv Wolfman talking about like the main thing that we do is we write the action, but you never know that we wrote it. You know what I mean? Because you don't get to read it. You see the visuals, but it's a visual medium. So that's what they do first and foremost. The dialogue doesn't necessarily dictate what the book is. It's the action. Now with these more modern writers, it's the opposite. They're really trying to flex their muscles. It's like, look, it's me. It's not, this action stuff. Okay, so 2000s. Maybe we should. We'll just go past 2003. I don't know if we're still in the modern age. Clint was hinting that maybe we should come up with a new name for.
Yeah,
Well,
I would say like 2010 and after is kind of the SJW age of
the
comics.
celluloid age.
Yeah, if you
That's
look at
that's what people
Marvel
are
and
starting to call
DC,
it.
they're more concerned with virtue signaling than writing good comics along with the rest of society. That's kind of happened. So I would say there's a definite era break around 2010. I mean, it could be a little bit before, it could be a little bit after.
I think it's around 2008 when the Marvel movies really started to hit. I think because that's when they started like, instead of writing comics for the sake of comics, it started being about creating properties to create movies and video games and TV shows. That's why the name that a lot of people are using now is the celluloid age.
Yeah.
So and it fits because they don't care about the comic industry itself. They just use it as a stepping stone.
Yeah. There was definitely a lot of writers getting into comics because they thought it was like a stepping stone job into getting into movies, definitely with the success of Iron Man. And I mean, again, that era of 2010, 2012, somewhere in there, and then just the whole injection of over-the-top, politically correct virtue signaling that kind of permeated all of Marvel and DC on both sides for the last 5, 6, 7 years.
When did Iron Man come out? Was that
2008?
2008. So yeah, you're right. About that time is when things were changing. Also, a lot of these guys were chasing Hollywood because they were like convinced that comics were going to die. And
Jim Lee was always kind of enamored with Hollywood, wasn't he?
Not when I knew him. Not when we worked together. I mean, he
really is now.
Comics. Well, I mean, they moved to Burbank. I mean, after a while, that stuff just gets in your blood.
Yeah,
like
like comic creators are always like, especially if you're creating an indie book of your own of any kind, you're always thinking of Hollywood because there's always more money in Hollywood than there's in comics. So we can't like just like, oh, just this creator was like everybody was like looking to turn their property into a movie to some extent, but it just it seemed like, I would say, after the Iron Man movie, a lot more writers that you wouldn't have seen normally be writing comics, all of a sudden they were coming into comics. And it wasn't just because the writers wanted to like get a job in comics and then go on to movies. I think a lot of it was editors were taking indie guys that had gotten something optioned as a movie and hiring them in because they wanted to pick their brain.
Yeah, the first guy, really, the prototype.
Screenwriter.
Yeah, the prototype for that was Kevin Smith. But I do think that these writers, these Hollywood writers, were coming into comics because Hollywood was looking at comic books. Yeah. You know what I mean? So they were just trying to get noticed. So if they could come in and write a series or something, then all of a sudden they had like street cred, right? It's like, oh, here's my comic book. Because there was a time in Hollywood, I know because I was pitching at the time, that if you had a comic book, it could open doors.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you could go, here's my comic book, that kind of thing. It legitimizes you and helps you build a resume, which is what those people were doing. But the thing is, you got to write good comic books. You got to make a mark. You got to do more than just write the comic book,
Yeah.
So a lot of these guys were just putting out like some punky punky stories and stuff like that. But let's kind of recap everything, and then we'll kind of figure out like what the best decade. Okay, so if I start choking on explaining the decade, you guys help me. Okay, so the 30s were basically the introduction to superheroes. So there was National, so there was Superman, there was Batman. National was putting out a bunch of other hero books. So basically the 30s were the birth of that. So we went to the 40s. The 40s were kind of more like war oriented. So there was Captain America, there was the Invaders, there was like heroes kind of helping out with the war cause and stuff like that. But if I'm not mistaken, the 40s were kind of just, they were just the 40s, right?
Yeah.
Not much, just kind of business as usual. So then the 50s, were kind of like starting to give birth to the Silver Age. So so the 50s were kind of like National or DC Comics reinventing what the hero was, right, for a modern audience. So there was the new Flash, the Barry Allen, there was Green Lantern, Hal Jordan, and then there was not Carter Hall. Who was the Atom? Ray Palmer. There was Ray Palmer, and so those type of heroes, and then there was the Justice League, and so then we kind of go through the 50s, and then early 60s is definitely the DC influence on Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Timely that became Marvel. So with the Fantastic Four, the basic birth of the Marvel universe was in the 60s. What else did we say? Like was DC was kind of like Batmania, but what they were kind of just
DC kind of created the template, and Marvel took it and perfected it, and just took off with it.
But as far as the 60s, the 70s, I mean, not the 70s, but the 60s, DC was just kind of like putting out product.
Nothing that stood out hugely, I would say.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. So now, like the 70s. So the 70s is where, like, early 70s, Marvel was putting out the new brand of IP, which was like Ghost Rider, Son of Satan, Brother Voodoo, Morbius, all these books. And
a lot of the cosmic. Am I wrong in thinking a lot of the cosmic stuff came out of the 70s too?
That was 60s, man. That was Jack Kirby.
Didn't the 70s like take it in, like the 70s, like they really took it and ran with it though, didn't they?
That might have been the beginning of I'm gonna forget his name now.
Mobius, like I know Mobius was in the 70s, right?
No, the 70s were when comics, as far as the 70s, with DC, were kind of starting to grow up. So there was the Green Lantern, Green Arrow. There was a lot of the Neil Adams stuff that was coming out. So DC was kind of, doing more mature, I guess.
Do you think comics. DC was growing up faster? Like DC started doing the more adult stuff before Marvel did?
No, not really.
Well, if we're still the 70s, I think,
because we were talking about Claremont X-Men was the 70s basically, and that was the rise of kind of like the superstar writer, and DC was still doing kind of like what we talked about, like the 100-page giants with the backup stories and Superman, Batman, World's Finest.
So basically, Marvel still kind of ruled the 70s. So they were putting out more interesting stuff. So now the 80s, okay. So the 80s, DC comes back strong, right? So they have like Crisis. Yep. They're doing a lot of the graphic novel, the more adult stuff, which is like Watchmen, Year One.
They also redefined Superman's origin, right? That was John Byrne's Superman. That was John Byrne's,
That came out of the whole Crisis stuff. So they did Year One books with Wonder Woman, Batman.
Oh, the Year One books. Superman. That's the thing big thing that came out of there.
That was a big thing for DC. Is like DC was getting away from the multiverse, and they kind of wanted to Marvelize the DC universe and combine everything and have these more grounded stories. And that's where you get Batman Year One, Byrne's Superman. Frank Miller, the graphic novels like Dark Knight Returns, Watchmen.
You said that was like when the graphic novels really started taking off.
Yeah, so DC was running on all cylinders at this point, right there.
But Marvel was still like the lion's share of the market, right?
It
Yeah,
was, but like DC
because
had bigger hits.
X-Men was running strong through the 80s.
Yeah, X-Men.
too.
That was X-Men's heyday in the 80s. John Byrne and Claremont on X-Men was
Yeah.
probably the top comic there.
Bob
Well, no, like
66 got a good point.
those two have got to be separated because
Yeah.
obviously Byrne wasn't on X-Men and Superman at the same time.
What's that, Bob?
I think Bob 66 had a good point. He said the success of Marvel forced DC to level up.
Yeah, and that's usually the way it works. That's why you like to have two companies and not just
Yeah.
Well, also, if you think about
competition
it,
pushes.
DC was going after Marvel talent. So with all that year one stuff and everything, like they brought Byrne over, they brought Marv Wolfman, Lin Wein, George Perez was a Marvel guy.
Yeah,
You know.
Well, and Perez came over and like took over Teen Titans and just like Judas Contract, dude. Like I was a DC fan. Because I was a Batman fan before anything else, and when Robin went to the Teen Titans, I followed that character over there. I was a Teen Titans fan before I was an X-Men fan. You know,
same. Well, I had some X-Men, but I wouldn't say I was a fan.
Yeah.
I religiously bought that Marv Wolfman,
Teen Titans,
George Perez, Teen Titans.
But that like, and also like you said, like when they were kind of growing up, I didn't like that Teen Titans Judas Contract comic was the first time I read a comic where the bad guy basically won. You know, and I was just like, I didn't. Again, it's one of those things where it's like you remember it vividly. Like I didn't know comic books would be like that. I thought the good guys always won.
Yeah, they started being more complex stories. Pablo Romero Art says EC was the 50s. So I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, because I think that's what started the whole like comic code.
Well, yeah, that was creepy, and all the horror comics were back then too, and that's what kind of started the comic code.
Well, there were some good horror comics in the 70s though, man. You had Tomb of Dracula that really took off again. But friggin' Swamp Thing. You know, that run was super friggin' iconic.
Yeah, that was
that was DC.
Early 80s, probably.
Yeah, that was DC. Okay, let's
Swamp Thing was what got Vertigo started, basically.
Yeah, really, it was
Alan Moore Swamp Thing.
But that was years later. Yeah, that was after Alan Moore came on, and Toddleben and Bassett came on that book and made it a hit. Okay, so that's the 80s. So highlight the 90s. 90s were growing up as a business. There was Image Comics, which was, trying to prove a point, creators versus, big companies. Sales were through the roof. Empires were built.
Yeah. And there's only one of the original books that's still running today, and that's Spawn.
So no Savage Dragon?
Well, yes, I forgot. Well, Savage Dragon stopped and then it started again.
It's not the same numbering though, right?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, because I think I can't remember what happened, but I think it stopped for a little bit and then it started again.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then the 90s were comics, becoming more commercial, the birth of like some of the gimmick covers, things like that. And then the early 2000s, kind of a sweet spot just as far as kind of bringing comics back to some kind of balance between, like writers and artists and just good stories, all the way up to, what did you say, Clint, to like 2010?
Yeah, I would say just as a rough point, 2010 is probably that turning point where the politics and social justice entered the scene more so than had ever had before in comics.
It's when the infiltration started and the rot began.
Yeah, where the political message became more important than the story of the comic of that's kind of this last 7-8 years, I would say.
And that's present day. Cells are in the dumpster. So okay, so let's I lost.
No, I'm here. I'm
here too.
I'm just doing something gross.
Pick your nose, Bob.
Okay,
so recap. Okay, so we have the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, early 2000s. Okay, so there's 7 decades. There's 70 years worth of comic books. Okay, so let's and chat. You guys chime in. So I'm just going to go through the era and we're going to yay or nay it. Okay, so we already kind of just recapped real quickly. You guys are probably really familiar with these decades too. Okay, so 30s, we had the birth of the superheroes. Yay or nay?
That's most important.
Yeah, we're kind of just going. Maybe we'll do top three. Okay, so we'll start with three. We'll start with the lowest, and then we'll go to the number one era.
It kind of has to be number 3 because without that, you don't get the rest.
Oh, Bob, this is why you get paid the big bucks. That was beautiful, man. That was beautiful.
It's like you gotta have the foundation.
Yeah, the importance of the creation of Superman and Batman is hard to argue with.
Because it's like without Superman, you don't get everybody else. He is the prototypical superhero.
I wouldn't put it as 3. Like I could just say what my 3 are, but like I would say those early, because it was just the creation of those heroes, but the overall decade or that whole overall era, I don't think was as important as just the creation of those 2 things. So,
well, I think Bob. Well, anyway, I'm not gonna. Maybe we should just do our top 3 then, and then we'll see what the chat says.
Yeah,
okay,
we could.
So since Bob picked his third, what would be your second decade?
My second, would probably it would have to be that Silver Age, man. When they took it and then they created the template and Marvel took off with it and literally created the Marvel universe. You know, all these.
Then you're talking about the 60s then. So
yeah,
so the
60s.
Second would be the 60s for you. Okay.
Yeah, the 60s, and then me personally. Okay, so these are the ones that I'm putting my personal preference out.
Yeah, these are your picks. Yeah.
Yeah. And then after that, for me, man, it's got to be the Bronze Age. Because we're
not going like.
I mean, from
just do it by decade.
19, yeah, like the 80s. The 80s is the one because that's when comics grew up.
Okay. So 80s were the graphic novel.
Yep, the graphic novels. It's when like we said, the comic books started growing up with the readers. You know, we had like Dark Knight Returns, Crisis of Infinite Earths, these defining moments, and also these defining characters that just continue on to the day. You know, that's when Wolverine got his own book, Punisher, Ghost Rider. It's the comic. That was the first decade I really think where comics grew up with the readers.
That wasn't the 80s though. That stuff came out in the 70s.
Well, it started in the same, but I think the 80s really took off with it.
Okay. All right. So Clint, what are your top 3?
Starting with the third. Number 3, I would say, is the 90s. Just because of the superstar artist and the art on the books, was just so over the top. They were pushing the boundaries on everything that you had seen in comics before. Jim Lee's X-Men, which you inked a lot of, is like, to me, is still one of the best looking, best art books.
It's my favorite.
I'll put that against anything that's out there. I mean, he took some of what John Byrne had done and just turned it up to 11. So I would say the 90s is number 3.
I think the 90s too is like because of the explosion with the artists that forced the writers to step up their game too.
Yeah, but that didn't happen till later. It was like the 90s was more about, I mean, there was good stories in there, but it was art was the main thing.
Yeah, because it was freaking beautiful.
The second era, and this probably should be number 1, but the 60s, because of the creation of the Marvel Universe.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, all the whole Marvel Universe of Stan and Jack. So the 60s to me, and probably would be higher if I was a little bit young or older and kind of had grown up in that era. But then for me, along with Bob, because it was my heyday for my age, is the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
Like the 80s had it all. It had the great writing, it had the great artists, it had classic runs. I mean, as much as I brag about Jim on X-Men 275 or whatever, you can't beat Claremont and John Byrne's X-Men run. That is probably the number 1 classic run in comics of all time. Frank Miller is getting his voice as a writer and an artist. Like you said, Crisis of Infinite Earths. There was just so much stuff that was happening in the 80s. and the whole industry was changing with the comic book shop. The comic book shop was a huge, massive thing, the direct market. So for me, number one is the 80s, that era of comics.
Wow,
And
I did not think that the 80s were going to be that strong. But when you start really thinking about like what happened in the even like some of like the 70s, there was some good stuff towards the end there.
Yeah.
The 80s
Yeah,
is
for-
like
go
it's
ahead.
like the 70s was when they bottled the wine. The 80s is when it fermented to perfection.
Yeah, but there was also like 80s, like late 80s, there was Pacific Comics, and for me, that was big, and
Yeah.
that was pre-Image Comics.
Mhm.
And I remember talking to Jim Lee, and Jim, I brought this up to Jim. He goes, yeah, definitely Pacific is the template, but the thing that Pacific did differently than us is that Image Comics is everybody at their prime. There was still potential. Like when Pacific did it, these were big names, but like all those guys had already kind of made their claim to fame. They were already kind of hit that peak and were kind of either just leveling off or kind of moving down the other side.
Sure. Yeah.
And so if you would have got Jack Kirby at his prime, you would have got Neil Adams at his prime, you would have got Mike Grillo, you would have got any of those things, then it could have been something bigger. And I remember like the downfall of Pacific was early investments, early expenses that they never recovered from. And that was sad, because I do think that was a very advanced publishing company, and they had the right idea. And like we said, there was even the royalty structure that they said came out of that. So so my top three is probably going to be a lot like let me see, where's Bob's
50s, 60s, and 80s is what I had.
Yeah, I think that's my 3, 2, 1 is exactly the same. So 30s, because of just the importance of the birth of superhero comics, basically. Even though it's so easy to kind of simplify, like, oh well, that's all that happened that decade, right? That's all, just the birth of everything. So I have to give it that. And I must say, this is making it a lot easier that we're going top 3 versus just 1, because that's really hard to find just one decade. And so then my second would be the 60s, because but it's weird because the late 50s for DC is what kind of moved us into the 60s, and what really kind of was the instrumental inspiration for the Marvel universe. But you cannot take the early 60s away from Marvel. Like that redefined the superhero genre, everything. One coherent universe. It wasn't like a mishmash like DC. I mean, there was a lot of thought brought into that Marvel universe at the inception. So I have to give the 60s. But then like the 80s, like there was a lot of stuff there as well. So there was a lot of innovations. There was a lot of things kind of moving, crossing over, and things happening that basically paved the way for like the modern comic. So I guess maybe also because for me, like those graphic novels like Watchmen, Year One, all those Year One books, and those real, like even Daredevil, Born Again, I think.
Was,
like that stuff is still like the 60s
classics.
Yeah, that connects fine, but I still don't really claim the 60s as mine. But like the 80s, it feels like I was finding these books. They were connecting with me. To this day, I still relish those stories. I can still remember those stories, all that stuff. So I have to say the 80s for number 1. So let me see. Danky Frankie's putting his in.
Same as me.
50s,
me and you.
60s, and 80s. No, we said 30s.
No, well, yeah. That the 30s, but I think he's going with the 50s.
The Silver Age.
The Golden Age is what he's
that I wanted to do decades, but it's weird because there's a lot of kind of
overlap.
Like
there's a lot of overlap.
Isn't like from from the first to the last.
But something like, I think the reason why the 60s and the 80s were it for me too is because there's so much. It's like even then, at that point period in time in the 80s, there's still so much connective tissue back to the 60s. You know what I mean? Because they hadn't started doing like the whole revisionist history and stuff that they've been doing like recently. Like all of it was still kind of in continuity.
Well, the thing is, people in the 80s, and I know because I started my career in the 80s, is there was reverence for what came before.
Yeah.
So there was a like Byrne, like you can't tell me Byrne, Claremont, all those guys, Lin Wein, Marv Wolfman, like that they didn't really understand what came before and didn't like take a lot of like knowing that this is important stuff, so we gotta make sure that we do this right. So they were kind of just a continuation of the same, not necessarily having contempt for it, not redesigning, rewriting, or any of those things, but contributing at the same time, like making new stories, new characters, things like that. So the 80s, there was a lot of new stuff coming out, but there was a lot of like just good comic books, you know what I mean? Like guys that knew how to make good comics. They grew up on the 60s and 70s books, and now we're making comics in the 80s as professionals. So yeah, I think that we're all kind of in agreement. Because what did Bob or Clint had the 90s as 3, and then so Bob's the only one that mentioned the 90s, which is like tough.
But if I had to pick my personal favorite, it would be the 90s. It would be the like the late 80s, early 90s.
Yeah, man. Mine would be a fight between the 80s and the 90s. And I think I would go with 80s just because more classic storylines, but the art in the 90s and the arrival of Image is huge. So
yeah, it changed a lot, but then it feels like that everything that's happening now is just the middle finger to that stuff as well. All of comics before,
all of comics, yeah.
Well, and what you said just a little bit ago, reverence for what has come before
is gone.
The last decade is like the opposite of that. It's like it's
resentment and
like we're gonna crap all over what's come before.
Yeah. What you did is not acceptable anymore, old man.
Flush it down the toilet, and like this is our thing now, and we're taking it from you. And F you to the fans, F you to the creators that worked on this stuff before, where they got their nose in the air. I mean, that's what the last 8 years of Marvel and DC has been.
They're going to step over. They're going to step over the corpses of those that came before to get to where they really want to go.
Yeah,
you have some of these guys even saying that they've never read a comic book in their lives. Like
they brag about it.
Yeah, you had Diane Nelson, who was running DC Comics, saying that she doesn't read comic books. It's like, you're running a comic book company.
Yeah. Like hiring activists like Ta-Nehisi Coates to write your friggin' comic book characters. Like,
it's like a mechanic, like opening up a transmission shop and saying, I have absolutely no idea what a transmission is.
Did you kick the tires?
That's not the transmission. Okay, so Jaro says, I got number 3, 50s. Number 2 is 90s, and number 1 is 80s. Okay, so I don't know. Bob and I got 80s too. So that 3 80s. What did Danky Frankie say for his number 1? 80s.
Yeah.
Holy shit! I did not see this coming.
Dude, the 80s was so big, though, man. When you really break it down, so much happened, and so much. And not only that, but you had almost like a passing of the torch to the next generation of these amazing creators. Think about all these guys that came out of the 80s, man. It's ridiculous. And some of them are still relevant to this day. You know, like Silvestri, and and I don't give a shit what anybody says, man. John Byrne's still relevant to this day. You can kiss my ass on that.
Oh, his X-Men stuff that he's doing just to do it.
Good Lord, man!
It's gorgeous.
I look at that stuff just every once in a while, just for inspiration. And
somebody made like those artist edition books like that. Someone did that, took all that stuff and bound it into that. I want to find who that dude is and pay him like whatever he wants to make one for me.
Well,
we were talking on the Kings about that. It's like has Marvel made an offer? Yeah, they've made an offer.
Oh yeah.
But the thing is, like Byrne holds all the cards.
Yeah.
So one of the things that they could do is meet his demands and rewrite comic history that's happening right now. I mean, there would be a lot of people coming back to
Oh
comics
God.
to read that stuff, you know.
Oh,
Jeez,
absolutely.
dude. I don't know, like when they a couple of years ago when they started doing that X-Men Legacy stuff, where they were like letting these guys who had like story ideas that they either didn't
Because
get
they
to
let
complete.
Claremont write again
Yeah.
on X-Men for the first time in forever. Was it Brett Booth?
Yeah. Brett Booth did like that completion of the extreme storyline that he was doing.
Yeah.
That was it. Bill Sienkiewicz came back and did one.
Oh, I missed that. Okay.
Was it a bunch of people came back and redid stuff, and I'm like, why wouldn't you do that through that?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. But it sounds like the 80s are number one. We have the 30s and the 60s in there as well.
Hey, Art, why don't you offer to ink those for him and see what he says?
It's a lot of work, man. It's
Oh God!
Yeah, but how
many issues has he done of it? I mean, it's
like 30.
Yeah, I know it's over a year's worth of issues. I don't know how many he's put out.
I think it's fantastic. He's doing it just because of the story that was in him, and he just felt like he needed to tell it.
Oh,
right.
Yeah.
So that's what he's doing. He's not necessarily doing it for financial gain, although I do think the future holds a huge paycheck for that guy.
Oh God. I think at some point they're gonna
I think he's selling all those original pages too, so I can only imagine what they're going for.
I know Scott Williams was inking them.
On that run, the new run?
No, I think he was just messing around on a page or two.
Yeah, no, he's like he's like, this is like one of my favorite things to do to just chill out. Is he's like getting those pages and he's inking them. I'm like, dude, hopefully he just keeps doing it. And eventually it'll all be done.
Well, maybe I'll do it. See what I can get for him.
Sold, man. I'll buy it.
Inking some blue lines. But I remember there was an X-Men where they had like a lot of guest stars, and John Byrne did a couple.
Yeah, he did a couple of pages. I remember.
And Scott Williams inked him, and I was like, "Oh man, this looks so good."
It looks slick. I remember that.
Yeah, it was. Really
it was too few pages for me.
I think there were like 2 or 3 pages, right? There wasn't a lot.
Dude, no, it wasn't. It wasn't too much, but it looked good.
There are some, like how he had like those classic versions of backgrounds that he does. Man, there is a page of the Blackbird, the old SR-71 version of the Blackbird, and it's this forced perspective. It's almost like it's launching like a rocket towards you. It's such a badass freaking picture. It's like, I need to see this thing, but it's not like incomplete. It's like complete. It's semi-sketch and semi-finished. I'm like, I need to see this freaking page completed, man. It's so freaking badass.
Yeah, great stuff, man. Great stuff. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up, you guys. Thank you so much. Like I said earlier on, there's a lot of competition tonight. Graham Nolan's family had some tragedy.
That was unfortunate, man.
His daughter, Becky, and her husband lost their apartment burned down. The whole complex burned down, and they lost everything. So there's a crowd fund. There's an art auction going over there. I was there earlier, but I'm sure it's still going strong. Go there, donate. I'm sure that the GoFundMe is up everywhere, on the show, so you can click that and donate. You don't have to, buy an auction piece because some of that stuff's a little expensive. But $10, $20, whatever you can afford would really, really help out. I couldn't imagine being in that situation, not having clothes, not having toiletries, not having anything. Like, that's really a scary place. So thanks, guys. And before we go, I do want to say that Clint Helinski has a brilliant book. It's called Maidens of Mayhem. I have the tab here. I'll share it with you real quick. It's fantastic. If you like this fun, sexy adventure, this is the book to get. Woo. So the link is in the description, you guys. This is in demand. Clint and I have been talking about probably doing closeouts, maybe a black and white Maidens of Mayhem, like closeout together, maybe Sunday before the King's show, but I'm not sure when that will be. So it'll probably be next month sometime. I want to get black and white into fulfillment, but I'm already jumping ahead too much on black and white. But yeah, this is a great book, you guys. This is Clint's new book. He is the sexiest artist in comics, so this stuff is fantastic. It's a lot of fun. Clint draws in a lot of different styles. He pays homage to a lot of cool classic covers. I know this one very, very well.
I was like, I can't believe I haven't tried to, or somebody hasn't homaged that cover before, because it worked out perfect for what I was doing.
Yeah, chick fight, and also I'm sure Marvel would like to bury this somewhere, and hopefully it will never see the light of day again, except this homage cover. So come by, check this out. Guess who wins? We have the tromboner. This is just good fun. Yeah, look at this stuff. Just fun, excellent. TNA
X-ray goggles on the superheroes. So.
Oh yeah, there's the tromboner in all his glory.
Yes.
He will blow your instrument.
Yes, he may be my proudest creation.
It's just great stuff. And the one of the amazing things about Clint is he's a workhorse, so he gets stuff done. So before you guys know it, he will be fulfilling that campaign.
I'm drawing the last few pages of the short story for the art book. The main book is completely finished, ready to go to the printers. So yeah, I'm finishing like the last 3 pages of the short story in the art book that introduces new supervillain Thundercock. So having a blast drawing those pages. But yeah, this project is going to be wrapped, and yeah, we'll figure out. So a lot of great feedback about the superiors, and the superiors do show up in some of these stories too. So just a lot of fun, and yeah, we'll figure out a closeout date and to go out with a bang, as you like to say.
Oh yeah, we'll bang the shit out of these books. But I have to answer this just to get serious for a moment. Thank you, Frankie. I hope their pets are okay. Yeah, Becky, who is Graham's daughter, her husband came home just in time to get the dog out. So I guess the fire was full of blaze, or just had started or something. I don't know the full story. So they did get their dog out. I think one of the apartments, they did lose their pets. So that's horrible. But
yes.
But go over there, support the Nolan family. I'm sure they'll really appreciate it. And Black and White is like this week. We're getting a lot of backers, so things are moving.
The heat is on
here. The heat is on, as the song says. So this is Black and White, Volume 2, Man vs. Machine. We just turned over 135. So now we're 135, 42, 1,598. So we're 2 backers away from 1,600 backers.
That's
so
awesome.
Yeah, let's get that to a nice even number. Make Pamela happy. So this is the campaign. This is the main book. This is the variant. And this is the variant as well. We have so much cool stuff here, you guys. The link to Black and White, Volume 2, Man vs. Machine, is in the description. So click that sucker if you like what you see. Back a book for yourself. It will not be long before you get your books. We just got these in today. I did a live stream where I show this off. These are the actual books, you guys. These are the actual books.
Beautiful.
So yeah, thank you. They just sent one out of each, like a little preview. I guess this was courtesy. But the full amount will be shipping the end of the week. So I'm not sure how many days it'll take, but we should get them early next week. And look, I don't know if you can really see it, but this is spot UV. So the foreground stuff is reflecting the light. Background is not, and then you can see the logo. Boom.
Yeah, it looks awesome.
Yeah, so it's really cool. And so we got these books are fully spot UV. So this is the Kiss Rook Report, and I know I got the other ones somewhere else, but that's I went over this all day. It was great. It was great. I might have even shed a tear on a live stream. So it's emotional, man. These are like your kids.
It's fun when you crack open that box from the printers and you see like the freshly printed, all wrapped up and all stacked and nice. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a good feeling.
It did look pretty. The stuff you showed did look pretty friggin' awesome, man.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. And yeah, Bob, I know you had a lot of family stuff early on today, so I want to appreciate thank you and tell you how much I appreciate you coming in.
I was just emulating a typical comics kid creator. I was late.
I was late. That's me. I'm always late.
Hey, Gage!
I'm always late. But very good, you guys. Thanks to everybody in the chat for hanging out with us. And we will see you next Wednesday at 8 Eastern Standard Time for another Pontificators. So take care, you guys.